Oh man, we are live on the YouTubes. I'm going to copy that link. This is what happens when you do stuff manually. I need a better system to take all this stuff online. But I think we're ready, Mr. Henshaw. Are you ready to rock?
I'm ready to rock. Let's do it.
Let's do this! And we are live on the internets. I am live here with Mr. Mark Henshaw, coming to you from Wuhan, Hubei, China. That's right. He's on the inside of the whole thing. How are you doing, Mr. Henshaw?
I'm doing really well, Elias. How are you?
I am doing well. It is good to hear your voice again. It has been quite a while. Moments, actually, because we were just talking before we went on air, weren't we?
Yeah.
But here we are. We're live, finally. I've been dying to get you on the podcast for the last little while, actually. When I restarted doing LSTU podcast, your name was near the top of the list. I wanted desperately to talk with you about this whole bug that's been going around, shall we say. And just to confirm, you are currently in Wuhan, Hubei province in China. That's right, yeah?
Yes, I'm currently in the Chicago of China.
The Chicago. What do you call it? The Chicago of China.
Ask Wikipedia.
Ask Wikipedia. Okay, fine. I will ask my magic Google box.
The reason why it's called the Chicago of China is because there's many high-rise buildings throughout the city. It's a metropolis, and also there are a lot of lakes.
Oh, okay. Well, that makes sense. I'm glad you didn't say the population, because they're only around 2.6 million in Chicago, whereas you've got around what, 11 million people in Wuhan?
Yeah. Yeah, there's the locals and then there's the foreigners together. I've heard estimates around 11 million.
11 million. That's a lot of people in one place. I was just, because before we went on air, I was doing a little bit of research, and apparently I need to do a little bit more research, because the numbers I came up with originally, I thought the population of Hubei province was 11 million, but it turns out that's just Wuhan.
Yes, intensification.
No kidding. So how have you been?
I've been doing really well. All things considering, I think now that we're dawning near the 70th day of self-isolation, I'm kind of starting to get cabin fever, but otherwise it's been going pretty well. So
self-isolation, that's not the word I was expecting you to use. My understanding is that the city of Wuhan has been under a lockdown, but you just said self-isolation. So catch me up. Has that lockdown been lifted, or are you allowed to go outside now, or what's going on? What's life like on the ground right now?
Okay, yeah. Well, first thing I'll address your question about self-isolation versus lockdown. It is a lockdown. The whole country was locked down, but the lockdown was the government telling people to stay home. So, the way messages were delivered in Canada versus China were slightly different, but ultimately it's the same thing. I think that we took it a step further though, because Canada has a lot of houses and more people live in houses than apartments. People can, they can come and go freely. Whereas when you live in an apartment complex, you have security guards. It is easier to isolate people because you can control the exits and the entrances of the security gates. So So it has definitely been stricter here than in Canada, but it's the same kind of idea. Stay home, isolate yourself, stay away from people. Yeah, so.
Now, you say that it's the messaging from the government was stay home. That to me makes it sound like it was more of an optional thing. Was like I know in Ontario, Canada, we've been told stay home, self-isolate, but we haven't been told that we're legally required to stay home and we have to kind of prove that we need to go out. I know Italy has been under very strict lockdown and that's been the case. But has this stay home order been something that has been, I guess, legally optional, or has it been, no, you must stay home unless you absolutely must go out, in which case you need to demonstrate it?
Yeah, no, this is a good question. To be practical about it, if I was to go out to my security guard gate right now, they would say, hello, what are you doing? And then I'd say, hey, if you want to go for a walk, they'd say, sorry, you can't.
Really?
So you would have to, you'd have to get past your security guard. So in that sense, it has been mandatory to stay home, but I don't feel that there's no one standing at my door, with a gun. There's been some scary videos going out online and stuff. Basically, there are people at the gate that take people's information that come in and out, and if you need to leave your complex for medical reasons or for health reasons, it's not a problem. But for everything else, like groceries, they're delivered here, so there's no need to leave. So it is a strict policy of stay home. I haven't seen a single police officer in this process, but as a community, everyone's just on the same page. So there isn't really a big problem with it, because we understood how severe the virus was at a certain point. So we've just been staying home.
And you said that there is, for groceries, that there's a delivery. Is that something that you as a consumer, you prearrange that with a company through an app, or do you put that, who do you actually send that order out to?
Well, for the groceries, and there are different time periods because it's been about 70 days now. There was a period of time where we didn't know what we were going to do, how we were going to get groceries, but that lasted a day. But for the most part, what happened is you have a chat group, which is your community, and somebody in the chat group says, hey, I'm going to buy some pork. Who wants 2 kilograms of pork? And then you get people's names, you get their apartment numbers and their units. And then once you have their money and what they want, which is just 2 kilograms of pork, then the community leader will contact the grocery store or whichever business that sells this stuff. And then I've seen a city bus roll up with food one day, drop it off, and then they'll give us a message in the chat group. We'll then go outside, we'll pick up our groceries, and then we'll come back in. That's kind of how it's been working.
And when you're going outside to get those groceries from that bus, I'm assuming that you're not, obviously there's going to be some sort of physical distancing. Do you go out and does everybody take turns going out to get that food, or how does that logistically work?
I haven't seen any kind of control on the physical distancing. People kind of naturally just stay away from each other. And when they go outside, it's pretty staggered. So, we just go out, pick up our groceries, come back in, and people again just kind of stay away from each other naturally. Because everyone's concerned and they don't want to spread the virus any further.
Another question about the building that you're living in. I know that you had mentioned that Wuhan's kind of like the Chicago of at least Hubei province. You're talking about a lot of high rises. Your building in particular, how many people, if you had to guess, are actually living there? How many floors are we dealing with?
I can't speak to vacancy, but I think what do we have, about 20 something floors. But our apartment's unique because each unit is 2 levels. So see, 20 times, yeah, it'd be about give or take 200 rooms, because about 10 rooms per floor, and about 20 stories high. Some buildings are a little taller, some are a little shorter, but I mean, people live in apartments for the most part in Wuhan. You only live in a house if you can afford it, and that affordability level is pretty high. Across China, it's mostly common to live in an apartment. I mean, picture the Platts Klein community. I know you used to. Well, I know you're familiar with that area. So, just Platts Lane communities everywhere.
Interesting. So this is a lot of medium to high rise apartment buildings just everywhere. Just let's pack them in.
Yes, everywhere.
Okay, so we're dealing with very population dense areas. Wow, so that has got to be no wonder it's been a very strict. It sounds like it's been a somewhat strict, let's call it lockdown, just because you're dealing with the sheer number of people you're dealing with.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow. And the bulk orders for grocery delivery makes perfect sense in that scenario too, because I can't imagine just having that many people all try to get out to the grocery store at the same time. That's just not going to work. Your social distancing is going to break down in a hurry.
Yeah, and I should probably add something to the social distancing point, because this first happened in my city, right? So when it first happened, we didn't exactly know what to do. Like, we as citizens, like, first you hear the news, there's a virus, that some people got a virus at this wet market, and you're like, oh, okay, yeah, whatever, it's a virus, not a big deal. And then time goes on, and then you hear, okay, somebody died from it, and then you hear, okay, it's starting to spread. And then it got to the point where the city was discussing whether or not they were going to shut down. So there was a whole process that it went through. And in the beginning, when the virus was already known to be out, people were going grocery shopping because we didn't have those measures in place. So we were coming and going from our apartments for at least a week or so after it initially happened. And then I remember my girlfriend said to me, we might have to do, someone else might have to get our groceries. And I was like, well, no, that's insane. Like, how would that happen? Like, logistically, how would that be possible? But again, something I've learned, as a compliment to the Chinese people, when you give them a challenge, they find a way to solve it. So like I said, I've seen city buses deliver groceries. I've seen community members step up and organize all this stuff. Like, no one's getting paid for this. It's a very, the mindset is very much, we're in this together. Let's figure this out.
You had mentioned when this initially happened, when the virus started to get out. When was the first? At what point did it feel like, or at what point did it get out? Like, when did you start to get this indication that something's going on? And I'm not meaning this in a conspiracy way. I'm like, at what point? No. We're not doing Alex Jones.
No. Hey. Okay, so I think it was around January 20th. I remember sitting down in a cafe with my girlfriend, and we were getting some work done, and we were actually going to go out with a friend of ours to the botanical gardens of the city. And then they canceled because they weren't feeling well, completely unrelated to the virus. And then I remember, a couple days after that, January 22nd or so, then that's when the talk got more serious, because around that time, Max, my girlfriend, and I, we were going to go out to visit her family. But then I started saying, well, we don't really know how serious this is. You're going to go visit your grandparents. They're more susceptible to illness. And then we were both kind of chewing on it. So I was maybe about January 23rd, I think, is I think it's a general consensus that it was like, okay, this is pretty serious. And then, but I don't quote me on the dates as to when they locked down the city or when they stopped transportation. Like, I don't remember those days.
For sure, and that those specific dates can always be checked later. That's so January 20th was when you really started to think about it. January 23rd is when there was a bit of consensus. And then, I mean, and I believe that the lockdown followed pretty quickly after. So when the lockdown actually occurred, so let's say it's day zero of the lockdown, what was going through your head?
Well, I was concerned about the virus itself because it was a new virus, and the professionals didn't know much about it. So I rely on science for a lot of information, and like good public health, reputable public health organizations, reputable journals online. But this is one of those situations where right away we couldn't really say much. So at first I was just kind of like, oh boy, like. I knew once we knew the virus was serious enough that they had to lock down the city, I didn't have a problem with staying home because I understood enough that if I was to leave my house, it would increase my chances of getting the virus or spreading a virus. So it wasn't really much of a debate. But as time passed and the World Health Organization got more involved and more public health information started to spread, I started to feel more at ease because it was things like, wash your hands. If you wear a mask, these are the benefits. This is how you wear a mask. But self-isolate, don't get into groups. So as time passed, I felt a little more confident. But in the very beginning, I was like, I had no idea. I mean, my friends back home wanted me to come back to Canada. The first time I had a chance, there was definitely some uncertainty and some feelings of chaos, I think, from my family and friends back home. But again, like the more we understood it over time, the more we researched it, the more we tracked it, the more confident I felt. But I wasn't doing anything really risky. I was staying home. So like I wasn't really increasing my chances of contracting the virus.
What about your family? Like obviously, as soon as back here in Canada, I mean, as a friend, I remember hearing Wuhan, that there's this virus going on around in Wuhan, and my first thought was, holy shit, Mark's there. So if that was going through my mind, what was the response from your family?
My family is, I love my family. I love them dearly. They have kids and they have their own lives. And I think they were like, when it first happened, I don't know how much of them actually knew it was happening. Like some of them did, some of them didn't. But once we got talking about it, I put them at ease pretty quickly because, like I said, I made it very clear. Like my message was very consistent. I said, I have no symptoms. I'm exercising precautions. I'm staying at home. There's no need to worry about me. And for most of my life, like I've been living outside of my home since I was 18 and being self-sufficient. So I don't think they were too worried about it. My father also, he's a very laid back person, but also he understands science better than most. So I found people that have a better understanding of science in general didn't panic as much. But people who didn't understand some of the basics, they got more caught up in the media hysteria. I have to say that the media hysteria from like popular American news agencies did not help the way people thought that I was. Like my friends like yourself were a lot more concerned. But again, my friends who were more kind of like I have friends who did their PhDs in different areas of science and their masters and like we can talk about sample sizes and probabilities and different things like that. But my family was a little more concerned. But again, I put them at ease pretty quickly because they trust me and they're like, okay, well, stay safe and be okay.
Well, and I've got to imagine too, like you are not the kind of person you don't strike me as the kind of person who takes just completely brain dead, unnecessary risks either. So, when you do something, you think it through. I'm not so hearing all of that and thinking it through. I'm not so surprised that your family was relatively calm about you being there. You're definitely right about the media hysteria part. There has been, I feel like there has been some sensationalism about what's going on. In Canada, it's been a little bit tricky to watch the news. I personally found myself, I've had to back off to watching. I'll get a daily update of here's the latest snippets, and then aside from that, the amount of value that the news outlets are actually giving in terms of, here's all the people that died and here's what's happening. And the biggest, okay, you know what? Actually, this leads me perfectly into the next question I have. Mark, I'm going to ask you a very difficult question here, and I need you to level with me. Is there a shortage of toilet paper?
There has never been a shortage of toilet paper in my experience in China. That was a uniquely Western thing. Honestly, okay, when the virus first came to China, or we became aware of it, obviously people wanted to go on vacation. They wanted to travel because it was the biggest. It's the biggest festival. It's the biggest holiday for Chinese people of the year. And some people just traveled. They didn't take any precautions because the city wasn't locked down. But I don't really remember a lot of panic happening. And call it a there are pros and cons to everything. Centralized state media controls the messaging, and centralized state media doesn't want people panicking, right? So whereas in Western media, we can get into this a bit too, but in Western media, you can have many different perspectives, left wing, right wing, conspiracy theorists, to very good founded research in the journalism. I will say that I think CBC's done a really good job of covering things from my perspective and relying on things like health experts and the World Health Organization to report. And that's made their journalism a lot more, stable. But yeah. So anyway, I found that the hysteria wasn't really in China in the way it was in the West.
Interesting. Well, I mean, with more of a centralized planning or centralized control of the media, I suppose that makes sense on a level. You don't want to get that mass panic. Just thinking about the sheer numbers of people in the country, getting one and a bit billion people all panicked at the same time sounds like a really bad idea. But so
yeah, and
go ahead.
Sorry. Okay. Well, just to give you a specific example, like in the grocery stores, for instance, we went grocery shopping about 3 times before we were no longer able to do it. And from the time that we knew there was a virus coming out and we thought that the city might be locked down, there's a window of time there. So not once was there an empty shelf. Not once was there people slamming. There were definitely long queues to buy food, but people were not panicky. When I was watching videos from my personal friends, videos on their Facebooks of lines that were way bigger than what I've seen in the grocery stores, and empty shelves. Obviously they're not going to record non-empty shelves, but I saw a lot of empty shelves pop up and people's personal pictures and stuff on Facebook. I didn't see that once.
What's interesting that I found with the empty shelves in Canada? I'll provide my own perspective on this, and I've had a few friends reflect on this and echo my opinion. Not opinion, but what I've seen is I've seen selectively empty shelves at different stores. Perfect example, early on when this was starting to come to Canada, I remember seeing the toilet paper shelf at Walmart was somewhat empty, but then you turn the corner and go to the pop and chips aisle or go to the cookies and coffee aisle, and it's fully stocked. Or you'd go to the canned food section and it's all there. There was just this selective herd mentality panic buying that was going on. That wasn't helping. people who are panic shopping like that. That doesn't help things.
Yeah, and I don't want to pretend, because as someone who's now lived in another country, I can't pretend that, and I use the example, I hate to say the name, but like Donald Trump is not America. Donald Trump is one person who represents America. The news I see about Canada is not all Canadians, so like I didn't want to assume that there was just like panic struck in Canada at grocery stores and whatnot, because that was just, I get partial bits and pieces from here, but I did get the general idea that like and maybe it's the perception I have through the media, it's my availability heuristics, but I just got the sense that things were a little more like people were just a little more freaked out in Canada versus my experiences in China, but that could just be me.
I think there was a lot of uncertainty. In fact, I know that you're aware of some of my background in the event industry, and the fact that it probably doesn't surprise you that all the shows that we had planned for Track This Event Passport, all of them have either been canceled or postponed for the next, indefinite while. We're now starting to look at doing more online shows, but there was a period of uncertainty. I want to say because here's the thing in Canada. Shit moved fast. Like in February, it wasn't even really on any Canadians' radar that this virus could get here. Like it really seemed like it was going to be. At that point, in fact, my fiance and I, we went to Florida the second last week of February. And at that time when we traveled, the only question around COVID that we got asked was, have you been to Wuhan or Hubei province in China? Like it was that specific. It was only asking if we had been in the province of Hubei, and specifically either in the province of Hubei or the city of Wuhan. Now this was second last week of February. One of the biggest shows we had coming up in March. It was supposed to be on March 24th. We had about 500 people scheduled, and they were all international. And as late as, I want to say, March, let me look up the calendar so I get the dates mostly right here. As late as March 9th, it was still looking like that show was going to happen. March 11th rolls around, and I start getting cancellations left, right, and center. So in Canada, we went from going through February, not even on anyone's radar. First week of March, starting to get a little bit of inkling like this might be a bad thing. And by the time the end of the second week of March happens, we're in full, Prime Minister's giving everyone instructions, get your ass home if you can. We're getting indications that, hey, this virus is in Canada. Borders are starting to shut. Like European Union borders were starting to shut down at that point. Like it in the West. So I want to say at least in my experience in Canada, it moved fast, and I feel like it caught a lot of people off guard. Which might have been, and the guidance coming out of the government was honestly not that. It was not what we heard. A lot of was there was a lot of uncertainty around what was going to happen next. There was basically just a lot of talk about if you're abroad, you may want to get home. Like that was kind of the guidance until about, I want to say, March 12th, March 13th, when borders started to close and we heard from the Prime Minister, time to get home.
Mm-hmm.
And then things really started to, and that also coincided, I believe, with when the all air travel from Europe was restricted via executive order in the United States, which really kind of underscored how serious this thing was about to become. But it was something that really kind of happened fast, and there wasn't a lot of good messaging until the week following.
Yeah, it's challenging. I mean, when you're dealing with a crisis that's relatively, I mean, I'll say relatively unknown. Like, it's a different experience for the Chinese people because it hit us first, as far as we understand. I mean, like, nobody else was testing for COVID-19 before China, right? There were definitely some lessons that could have been learned, that the West could have picked up on, but the thing is, like, whether you have a centralized government or whether you have a democracy, people are the same. You know, like, you tell people, okay, stay home. Most people are going to be like, yo, you're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I mean, I guess, like, so even though China, the China story was told and that message got out loud and clear, when it hit Canada and America, you know, at first it seemed that there was uncertainty about people, whether or not they should stay home, or whether they should, like, how serious this really was. But it seems like it's gotten a much better place, at least for Canada. Like, from my perspective, it seems that the government's been handling things pretty well. But again, I'm always limited based on news and communication I receive.
Well, and that goes both ways. You know, I'm limited from where I sit about what news is happening in China because obviously I'm in Canada, and vice versa. You're limited on knowledge of what's happening in Canada because you're in China. We're all going to get different perspectives, and we can only report on the perspectives that we have. I like this. I want to explore this tangent a little bit about the idea of this virus being relatively unknown, because I feel like there's been some people that have been. I can think of a couple of friends of mine who have been, let's say, COVID severity skeptics. I don't want to say COVIDiot because that's a stupid hashtag, and B, it doesn't quite describe it. But they kind of think that this whole thing is overblown. That the idea that we're locking down or we're going into self-isolation or we're doing social distancing, that, oh, it's just stupid, and, you know, it's no worse than the flu. Which, no, it is worse than the flu. But what I really feel like we're going through right now is, it feels like in a way, it feels like we're overreacting. We're basically just shutting down countries, shutting down economies. But it reminds me a bit of the year 2000 problem. Do you remember Y2K?
Yes, we were in grade 6, Eli. I remember the Y2K. The bug.
Yep.
You could buy a Y2K bug from Walmart if you wanted.
You could buy the Y2K. You could buy the Y2K compatibility fixer kits, and everything had Y2K stickers on it. That was the big deal. You know, power plants were going to shut down, and there was going to be no more water, and people would be mass pandemonium and chaos again.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But Y2K didn't end up being, like, aside from a couple of minor glitches here or there, Y2K largely was not a problem. But it was because we did a ton of work behind the scenes to make sure that the problem was fixed. Make no mistake, there were huge problems waiting to rear their ugly heads. But we mostly fixed the Y2K problem so that, and spent a ton of money doing so. Both governments and private organizations spent a ton of money making sure that Y2K was fixed. I feel like that COVID-19 is kind of like Y2K, except the cover has been pulled off and we're seeing the fixes and development happen in real time. What do you think?
Well, I mean, the first point you made about your friends and the severity, I can't really speak to that much. I'm really not qualified to. But in terms of our preparation, like, a friend of mine's actually a journalist, and he did an investigative report on a COVID virus, a coronavirus, with epidemiologists in the past. And the theme that seems to go across epidemiologists, and I was watching the pandemic documentary on Netflix as well. So, I mean, I'm no expert in these areas, but the consensus was, we're not ready. Bill Gates has been saying that for a while. Other people have been saying that for a while who know this area much better. And I think that it's very clear that we are not ready, because when it hit us, we didn't know what to do. Like, we didn't really have a plan. And I'd say it was like that with China. It was like that with Canada, England, Italy, America. Like, we've been watching governments make a decision. I mean, like, and I don't want to name names here, but we've watched governments make decisions and then go back on those decisions while we're having this huge virus. Like, really big, like, faux pas. I mean, I guess I'm not gonna a good friend of mine's in England, for example, and he's living in London, and he said at first they said, we're gonna do herd immunity, guys, everyone for themselves, and then they said, no, go home. That just shows that we're not ready. But I say that as a globe, and it's hard because when you're a government and you're running a country, there are so many priorities. And obviously certain priorities will float to the top more than others. But science, good science, is about prevention, and especially health science. So when you have, like, this very wealthy company that wants this policy done, or a conglomerate of companies that want this policy done and at a political level, versus, hey, there may or may not be a virus that may or may not hit us at any time and could kill 10% of the population, they're not going to listen to the virus guy, because prevention is one of the last things that we listen to. So I think that this has shown us that, like, just like Bill Gates and these other epidemiologists have been saying, we are not ready.
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, I don't know if that really answers your question, but I think it's been proven across every country. Like, and I'm going to say something slightly controversial. What I like about living in a centralized government is that when they saw that it was serious, and because, like, there are levels of authority, there are levels of experts, there are levels of politics you have to go through before a country locks down the country. Like, it's a very serious thing. It's almost like a form of War Measures Act in Canada, right? But I have felt very comfortable in China because people, like you said, it was stricter, that people needed to stay home. I wasn't as worried. Whereas when I was hearing it happening in Canada, I was hearing, people aren't taking it seriously. St. Patrick's Day may or may not happen, and all these things. Like, it didn't happen in London, and it didn't happen in most places in Canada. But it's interesting watching a free society and a crisis hitting a free society versus a crisis hitting a centralized government. And in this particular case, I will say that I'm more comfortable being in China during a pandemic than I would be in Canada.
Interesting. At the same time, let me give you this counterpoint to think about.
Mm-hmm.
In terms of the coronavirus and the reaction of, say, the Canadian government versus the Chinese government, would you agree with the idea that in China you did have it seemed like you had some warning that it was that it might not have been months of warning, but you had maybe a week or two worth of warning that something's about to happen here. Like, this is getting bad.
Yeah, well, there's definitely been talk about that, and that's the and I'm going to say this carefully. That's the limitation to living in a more controlled society, because I've heard criticisms from the Chinese people over social media and different things about we could have caught this earlier, we could have acted sooner. At the same time, like, as someone, like, personally, I've done a lot of different, had a lot of different experiences in politics, and I've seen and met decision makers, and a decision maker doesn't make a decision because they heard that their good friend who is a virologist said, oh, by the way, this is a deadly virus, we should now lock down the country. Okay, let's lock down the country.
Right.
Like, that's not the way it works. When you tell people they can't move, they have to go home, they can't take travel, like, they have to stay where they are, there needs to be a really good argument for that. So I think that on the critical side, I think that there was a bit of a delay that where the word could have gone out sooner, the lockdown could have happened sooner. But again, I don't know. Like I do not really know good information on this. But at the same time, I respect that government institutions don't move on a dime, and I respect that just because there was a doctor, Dr. Lee, who is like the whistleblower, for example. So it said, and he said pretty early on, like, hey, this is a problem, and he was reprimanded by the police. The police, after that situation happened, they apologized. They said, okay, we made a mistake, and that looks messy. But again, a government is not going to listen to one or two people or a handful of people who are not like, on a certain panel and then say, oh, Jim Bob said that there's this virus, therefore we should lock down. So I do think, based on the criticisms of the Chinese people on social media, maybe it could have acted quicker. But at the same time, I respect that there's a process that happens before decisions are made.
See, here's where I think we need to be careful. I think it's kind of a cheap shot. I don't care what government it is, Chinese government, Canadian government, American government. I think it's a real cheap shot to say we should have acted sooner. Well, no shit. Like, if every government knew what they did, knew about how bad this thing could possibly be back in, let's say, December or January. I mean, there's a reason the thing is called it's called a novel coronavirus. It's new. We haven't heard about it. We haven't discovered it before. Like, if we knew back then how bad this thing was going to be, is there any doubt that every government would have said, everybody stay the hell home for 2 weeks. We need to keep this thing under control. Like, I think that's a no-brainer.
It's a good question, and I mean, again, I don't liken the president of America to the American people. Those are very different situations, and the president of America only has so much power and influence as well. And I'll get into that in a moment. But look at what happened to America. I swear, 2 weeks ago or so, I was watching Donald Trump tell everybody to calm down. It'll be fine. We'll open up America again by Easter. Like, hello.
Yeah.
And then he changed his mind. So like, I do, as you said, and the other thing is, again, I put a lot of, my bias is towards the World Health Organization. Oh, are we still there?
Oh, hold on. Sorry, Mark, one of my headphones just failed as we were talking.
That's okay. No,
there we go.
I respect that. Yeah, like you said, regardless of country, I think there would be a bit of a scammering, a bit of a delay, a bit of a time to process and think before acted on. And it was clear looking at England, looking at America, there was even going back and forth on decision making. So like, I think we have to give governments a bit of credit when a global crisis hits. No one really knows exactly what to do, no matter what it is. But at the same time, like, I hear the criticisms of the people, but even my bias, the World Health Organization, they're going to do an autopsy on this, and they're going to investigate, as close as they could, what happened, and they're going to come out with a report, and it's going to say, okay, whether or not it could have been acted on sooner, I'm sure there's going to be a point there. But something that the World Health Organization has said, which still applies because we're still in a pandemic, is, okay, like, if we keep saying, oh, this could have been dealt with sooner, this could have been dealt with sooner, we're not focusing on the solutions. We're not focusing on what we can actually do now. We're looking in the past. Like, let's do the retro after, the crisis has been averted, not in the middle of the crisis.
Yeah, let's put out the fire. We can do the kitchen renovation after we've dealt with everything. That's been my quote about the climate emergency, and just some stupid points around that is. Anyway, that's a completely different topic, but
yeah.
But I mean, it's. I guess what I'm trying to get at is I feel like there was a little there. perhaps China had a little bit more warning than. You know what? I don't know, because then you could also make the argument that the West, had a lot of, could watch and see what's happening in China, and I don't know, put two and two together. We have much more open borders than, say, we had during the 1918 pandemic. It's a lot easier to travel abroad, and it shouldn't have been that big of a surprise that, hey, this thing is going to go international. We should be careful. But again, it's getting back to human nature. It's nobody wants to be that guy that cries wolf, right?
And nobody wants to be the guy that says, okay, we need to shut everything down. Because when you do that, it's a very serious decision. It has a huge effect on people's lives. Like, I'm fortunate enough to be continued to getting paid and have work with my work. But there are people who have lost their jobs. There are people who work for companies that rely on foot traffic. Eli, you and I are in fortunate situations where we can go to online learning and teach that way. But not everyone's in that situation. So it's difficult. It's difficult, and I extend that to any country that's dealing with this. Even if they heard about it, after China had dealt with it. It's a difficult situation because, like you said, I think it comes down to human nature. We don't want to believe that, we need to stay inside for 24 hours a day for weeks on end. It's not something that interests us, gets us excited. But I think for the most part, people have done everything they can to try to limit the severity of this virus.
I think, well, think about this. It's like what we're living through right now is stuff that you read about in fiction novels. Like if this gets turned in, this is going to be the biggest novel of the century once it gets written. Because if you were reading this in a book, you'd go, son of a bitch, good book, man.
Totally. Movies will definitely be made after this. Like, just think about it. Like our favorite political satire shows, the people are at home.
Yeah.
Filming from their laptops, or they're doing what we're doing, except they're making a lot more money. But
well, we'll see for how long that happens. I mean, at some point the bills got to get paid. Mm-hmm. And these companies are not sitting on bottomless pits of money either, unless you're Disney.
No. Yeah. Hey, Disney Plus was good timing.
No kidding. Suddenly Mr. Iger looks like an absolute frickin' genius, doesn't he?
Anyway, I don't want to get too off track here. I mean, I know that my unique perspective is that I'm in Wuhan. I don't want to derail things too much, but I mean, at the end of the day, I think I'll say, to wrap up that part, is we're all in this together. China's decisions affect America. American decisions affect Canada. Canada's decisions affect the rest of the world. And I just hope that we can continue to work together to neutralize this. And we will get through this. And there will be bumps and bruises, but I'm confident we're going to see through this.
Absolutely. We're getting to I feel like we're getting closer to the end of this. That might be just my natural, piece of optimism that's like, we're going to get through this and the end is not too far away. But like, another part too is we've also never been in a situation where we've had the best and brightest minds in the world able to work together, in real time, no matter where they are on the planet, to research and figure out how to beat this thing. Like, we're going to beat this thing. I think the tricky part is we're dealing with the uncertainty of, so when is this going to end?
Yeah.
We know there's an end date, but we don't know when it is.
Yeah, and I think uncertainty is what scares people more than anything.
Now, I've read on the news, and this is where I'm going to ask you for a bit of a fact check. I've read on the news that this mandatory lockdown in Wuhan and Hubei is starting to be lifted. Now, is that the case? And B, are people starting to return to normal, or is it really still like people are kind of sheltering in place and not going out?
Okay, well, my understanding is that the quarantine in Wuhan will be lifted on the 8th of April.
Okay.
And at that point, we will be able to leave our apartments freely, like before, as far as I know. Like I know that the buses are moving again, the subways are moving again. Some people have been able to go back to work, depending on like your company has to go through a bit of a process with the government to say, okay, we need to get back to work. This is why we need to get back to work. And then once that gets approved, then the people who work for that company can go out and get to work, which is why the transportation is moving again. So I get messages from the government on my cell phone, which are just updates on kind of like how things are going. And there's just been a lot of messages in the last couple of weeks about, oh, this has started again, and whatnot. But I'm hoping I can leave my apartment on the 8th of April. But I mean, at the same time, I don't want to get myself too excited because we've been doing this for, it'll be about 75 days. And I would just hate it if someone was like, sorry guys, you got to stay inside for longer. We don't know when, but yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I guess the next natural thought there is as even though it's been 70 days, 75 days, my mind goes to, is that too soon? Are we actually ready to start lifting those restrictions? Not just in Hubei province, but, because obviously what you're going through is kind of a test run for what everybody's watching closely to say, is this, what's this timing? What's the result going to be? If we see that, I guess I've got my fingers crossed that these lockdowns get lifted and it's a success, because that gives the rest of the world an idea to say, okay, we put these measures in place. After 75-ish days, we're good to resume something approximating normal.
Yeah, well, it's a really good question. And in listening to the health experts around the world, and the term is, bend the curve was oh gosh, I'm forgetting
Flatten the curve.
Bend the curve?
Flatten
the curve. Thank you. Okay, I didn't think I had that right, but yeah, flattening the curve. So that's the whole idea. So if the numbers that have come out from China are correct, which I would quibble with, but I won't get into that too much. If they are correct, the curve in China is flattened. Even if we don't have 0 cases in China, the amount of, I've been watching the numbers drop from the end of January slowly over the last, month and a bit. So if those numbers are true, then it's an appropriate time today, next week, 2 weeks from now, whatever, to go out. The thing is, when you release people back, you will have an influx in cases.
Right.
That's not a mystery. That is going to happen, because before this happened, we didn't identify the virus. We did not know what we were looking for. We did not know we were looking for anything. Now we know what we're looking for. So now that we know what we're looking for, and we've had X amount of thousands of people, tested for this virus, we have a much better understanding of the virus. So when people touch each other and walk in subways and go on buses and stuff again, it's going to spread.
Right.
How bad it's going to spread, we don't know. Is it too soon, to your question? I mean, I'm the last person you should ask that question, but at the same time, there comes a point where if the cases are dropping and dropping and dropping, then I think that's a really good sign. And from what I've heard from international health experts is, once you get to that point, then you can, think about slowly releasing people back. But again, there will be relapse regardless. How bad it is, I don't know. We'll see what happens.
Right. I'm hoping that the relapse isn't too severe. My hope now is that we come up with some sort of a temporary solution that says, you know what, even if you contract coronavirus, COVID-19, if you take the following dosage of meds, it'll mitigate the severity, or at least let you, if you take this dose and you're inside for 7 days, then you'll be fine. I'm hoping we come up with something like that, but who knows at this point? It's, it just sucks that we don't have any workaround. My hacker brain is just going mad thinking, can't we just do Control Alt Shift P for taking a pill and that'll be good enough for now?
I think the workaround for now is kind of the reality of if you're younger, if you look at the statistics, 80% of people who had the virus do not have severe symptoms. That 80% of people are likely younger, likely more healthy, and likely do not have pre-existing conditions. So if you get the virus, I was just talking to a journalist yesterday, actually, he's a young guy. He has the virus right now.
Oh, really?
But his symptoms have been, he's from Alberta. His symptoms have been getting less severe over the last couple of weeks that he's had it. So you can have the virus, and because there is a spectrum to this. It's not like you have the virus and you're dead. It's you have the virus and there are different symptoms, and they could be severe, they could be less severe. You could have the virus and not even know you have the virus, which is the frightening part. But yeah, it's it is a mystery. But I think, like you said, the workaround is dealing with the symptoms as best as we can, and that's it. But that's like any flu. That's like any virus. Until we have a vaccine, we just have to manage the symptoms.
Right. I suppose you're right. It's just straight up managing the symptoms, straight up just kind of following the typical guidance that we would get if you were sick with anything. Stay home, take care of yourself, don't touch all the surfaces. You know what? I just remembered some great... I got a feeling there's going to be some professional development materials that are going to get changed. I remember when I was in university, and as part of co-op, we had to take this professional development series of courses. And in this one course, it talked about, should you call in sick if you're sick? And this is going to sound so stupid and dated right now, but it literally said, yes, go to work, tough it out. That will show your employer that you're motivated to be there. Go to work even if you're sick. And
that's what they told you?
That's literally what was written down. And this is not this is not 1987 crap. I was taking this in 2008. Doesn't that sound real stupid right now?
Wow.
Yeah, go to work if you're sick.
In context, because there's a difference between being contagious and not being contagious. If you're not contagious and you're sick and you can suck it up, go to work.
Sure.
But if you're contagious, no, it's not fair. It's absolutely not fair.
Yeah, stay home. Don't if you're contagious, don't go out. Don't touch any. Just wrap yourself in bubble wrap. Stay home. Get a comfy couch and just chill. You'll be fine.
Yeah. So I guess jumping back to the virus for a moment, I guess this is my personal opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of anyone, but by China releasing their people back to work and stuff for many reasons, for health, it seems that the data says that cases are down, this is more under control, and for economic reasons and other reasons, naturally we are going to be building more of an immunity as a country in China by going back and living our lives, because you can't social distance in a Chinese subway, Elias. Trust me. When I'm on the subway to work and back, there's no such thing as social distancing. You are cramped like sardines in these subways. It's not going to happen.
Well, social distancing in any dense population is not going to work. How it's no different, and it's got to be you guys have more people there, just raw numbers, but looking at some of the pictures coming out of subway systems in, say, New York and London, well, not London so much, they're on full lockdown, but for essential workers trying to get to work, they're dealing with the double whammy of they got to get to work on public transit, and there's less of the public transit running, so they're all cramming in.
Yeah.
It's this is not a good situation.
And that is why, and again, I can't speak on behalf of the government or anyone else, but my personal opinion, I feel that by releasing the people back, one of the outcomes is working towards a herd immunity because you can't avoid it. It's a fact. Like more people will get the virus, right? And if more people get the virus, more people will get sick. How bad it gets, we'll see. But like if I get the virus, likely what would happen is I get the symptoms, I get quarantined in the hospital, I be there until my symptoms disappear, and then I go back out and I'm immune.
Right.
So what's the difference between me as an individual and anyone else in a crammed, dense, populated city? So I think that, like, again, it's not necessarily by design, but I think that as a country, we are going to work towards a herd immunity. And ultimately, as a world, when people get released again, they're still going to have that chance of getting the virus. And it's going to spread when people are moving around more. It's just the way it is.
Well, and we can't keep things shut down indefinitely. I'm thinking about the event industry. Obviously, I'm feeling for those people like hell. It's, I've had to pivot real fast. It's watching the event industry just get absolutely devastated by this because they rely on in-person contact. And with all the events being canceled or postponed, like, there's a lot of people that's a multi-billion-dollar industry that just basically had the lights turned off overnight. And we don't know when. I've been told about major companies in the industry that literally within, we got to March 13th, within a couple of days, we're on like round 2 and 3 of layoffs. Yeah. That's how bad, because that, and it's an industry too that has always, kind of the advice that I've gotten is that when I've been talking about my app in that industry is, everybody's like, oh, well, events always get planned, sometimes 2 or 3 years in advance. And man, that's a gold mine because it's basically a guaranteed thing. But it's not. It's just not anymore. We know it's going to come back. We don't know when. But we also know that we're also just learning real hard that if you don't have a backup plan or you can't adapt to this new world somehow, you're in big trouble.
Well, when we eventually roll back to the point where we can have big gatherings again, do you see yourself having kind of a hybrid of a physical show up to the conference, or if you can't come, here's a virtual world that you can engage in? Like, do you see yourself moving in that direction?
See, I'm not sure about a virtual world because I've watched a lot of these different event technologies come and go. I've watched as virtual events seem like they were going to be the next big thing and, oh my God, we're going to have virtual reality. And like, I remember back in 2006, 2007, looking at some conferences that were being held on Second Life, which is, where all the nerds who didn't have a first life went and played. I'll say this, that technology always demos well, but it never replicates the in-person experience perfectly. Like it's okay, but it's not, I don't know. The barrier to entry is very high. You need a decent computer. If you're recreating a virtual environment, you need a decent computer off the bat. And most people, you and I are more tech people than most, me definitely. Our phones are better than most people's. Most consumer phones, most consumer tablets cannot handle virtual environments. They just don't have the power yet. And then you've got the issue of, all these environments kind of demo well, but a lot of times companies fall into the trap of just, let's recreate the convention center in a virtual environment. You can scroll around it with your mouse. Ooh, how fun.
Yeah.
Not to sound like a jaded prick, but it's like, oh, how fun. I get to go to the digital foyer where, 3 other people who could be bothered to install this virtual app are hanging out, and we're all saying, hey, isn't this cool? You miss out on a lot. I think what's happened, and this is where we're going with our product, we haven't taken advantage of the horsepower that you've got at your fingertips when you're a participant from home. Is your computer probably weaker than that in the workplace? Does it need to run 3D graphics? No. But do you have access to, say, more screen real estate? Do you have access to a keyboard? Like, typing on a phone is miserable. Like, you and I both know this. We never want autocorrect to duck. Like, it has taken 2 years for my phone to figure that out. And I'm proud of that. But typing on the phone is a miserable experience. Creating content on the phone, like unless you're just snapping pictures or photos, or well, snapping pictures and photos are the same thing. Unless you're taking photos or videos or creating content like that, you can do that on a phone quite quickly. But if you're, doing live document editing or trying to take notes, it's a pretty miserable experience if you're on a phone. If you're at your computer, you've got more horsepower, you've got more screen real estate to deal with, you've got more of an opportunity to kind of dig into details at an event. So we've kind of given them lip service so far. We've said, here's a YouTube live stream, have fun. And that's been your virtual conference. Yeah. Thanks for your $200.
Yeah, there's so many, the unique thing about a conference is I think is that there's so many physical locations, right? That you can freely go to when you're there, but when you're not there, so what are you going to do? You're going to set up a screen at every booth?
Well, as fun as that would be. And
then they have to be able to interact with the people at the booth. So yeah, it's not my field, but I thought I'd ask the question.
Yeah, it's an interesting problem to solve. How do you make the person who's at home feel invited and welcome? And funny enough, my fiance and I were discussing this the other night because having just gone through the experience of taking 2 courses online in the span of 2 weekends, which was a ton of fun, loved doing that. Shout out to anyone who's looking to take your course content online. Hit me up. More than happy to help you out. It's a ton of fun to record that content. I've found that with a lot of online conferences, the common element I've seen is here's a live stream, here's a YouTube stream. You can submit questions maybe on Twitter or something like Slido, but that's about it because there's 20,000 other people on the live stream as well, and we've got 3 moderators.
Yeah.
It's very much a one-way dialogue.
Yeah.
So the one thing and you and I kind of experienced this when we were at the Bring IT Together conference back in November. It was that you really opened my eyes at that conference to just some of the human interaction elements that I hadn't been paying the most attention to. And it probably sounds weird from the guy who designs event apps, but stay with me. You really kind of opened my eyes to the amount of networking and the amount of interaction that happens outside of the sessions, and that the sessions are important. Don't get me wrong, but watching you go around the conference and what you taught me, I came to the realization, I'm like, geez, these are like almost secondary to the conference agenda is almost secondary to these conversations I'm having with random people that I would otherwise never have.
Yeah, it's I see it as, it's kind of like birthday parties or dinner with the family. They're expected on the calendar. People show up, but it's it's those personal interactions that happen that are really more significant. And when afterwards the conference, when people gathered at the restaurant, that's when you can really sit down and have an open conversation. I just find that environments, can really impact people's communication and yeah. So anyway, I'm happy you walked away with some new experiences and learned some things from that conference.
But the tricky part now that we're all forced to be at home, and now that we are trying to figure out because week 1 when we were going through the Wuhan, or not, when we were going through the Corona issue,
You were just about to say a politically incorrect statement. Don't worry about it, man.
Yeah, apparently I was. No, it's because I'm on my screen. I've got my show notes, and I read Wuhan, and I'm like, okay, no, this is not what you think it is. No, it's when we were going through week 1 of this coronavirus, I remember sending out emails and feelers to people saying, hey, we're here to help you take a conference online. And blowback from that was quite intense. But what I realized was people just weren't ready. They weren't ready to think about taking their conference online. They were not ready to, they were figuring out, hey, March break just started and I'm stuck home with my kids. What in the hell am I going to do? Oh, I got to teach these little buggers now? No way. How are we going to do that? So they weren't thinking about how do we replicate our conference on a computer screen. They weren't ready for that yet. Now we're starting to get into that point, I think.
Fair enough.
But we'll find out. The trickiest part is going to be how do you replicate those kind of bumping into each other in a, I even hesitate to say virtual environment, but there's something there. Once that gets figured out, then I think we can have some really compelling virtual events. But the barrier to entry, I think the barrier to entry is still there. I'm sure there's event companies that are going to say to me, oh, no, well, we have a beautiful app for that. All you got to do is go through this 23-step process and you're in a virtual conference.
I think the closest thing to that, but again, I think you've already addressed it, is the potential virtual reality. But it's we'll see.
But the problem with virtual reality, and I had this conversation with S a couple days ago, last week? Yeah, around this time last week.
Last week.
Yeah. We had the conversation, and I still maintain that the tools for developing VR experiences just suck. They straight out suck. I cannot take them and within 5 minutes have a spinning cube. If I can't do that, the tools suck. That's my bar.
Oh, fair enough.
I know I'm demanding. How are you doing for time, by the way? I know we've flown past the hour. I knew we would because you're just one of the most interesting people on the planet to talk with.
Oh, it's very kind of you. I'm doing all right for time, but if you need to end it, that's okay. Whichever for you. I have to say it's really nice just to catch up with you and to chat, and also, as you know, and because before when we were under quarantine in China and you weren't in Canada, I'd try to set up time to chat with my friends, and they're like, yeah, for sure. But now you know what I feel. You're at home isolated just like I am. So we're going through this together. So it's actually, this is one of the most social things I've done all week. Potentially over this entire virus. Yeah.
That's why I've been doing these podcasts again, just to at least get some social interaction going. Because it's like, oh my God, you sit at home for 2 weeks. And I mean, I'm more well equipped to deal with this than most people, considering that I've been working from home for 10 years. Mm-hmm. But even then, I'm finding it difficult to do this. Mm-hmm. And I've been working at home for 10 years, and I'm the quote unquote introvert, which now I'm starting to I'm thinking to myself, I don't think I'm as much of an introvert as I thought I was.
I think as your extroversion grows, my introversion grows.
Maybe. Okay. Tell me more about this.
No, just as I've gotten older, I've recognized that I have limits, and I try to identify the limits before I run past them. I think when I was younger, in many different situations, more severe and less severe, I've just kind of been my glowing light bulb. But as I've gotten older, I realized that there were times where I burnt myself out without realizing it. And by the time you realize it, it's kind of too late. So as I get older and I do have less energy as I used to, I try to be just more aware of the way I use my energy so that I don't put myself in a harmful situation.
Interesting. That makes a lot of sense. That's a very introspective point to realize about yourself too.
It's taken a lot of experiences and mistakes and things, so it takes time.
Absolutely. I can imagine. I know for me, growing my extroverted side has been, I've had to work at it. Let's put it that way. This did not come naturally. It's a tricky thing to switch your core personality.
Yeah, it's the reinvented self, and I think you have a lot to be proud of, Elias.
Well, thank you. Let's change gears for a second, because before we got on the stream, we were talking about creating content and moving our lessons online. You mentioned that you've been creating online content are you teaching, which grades are you teaching right now?
I'm actually teaching kindergarten. So, how old would these kids be? 5 to 7.
5 to 7
years old. Yeah. Yes.
And you had mentioned that you've had to take your content online. What's that been like? What have you been doing to keep those kids engaged?
Well, I think the first thing I'll say before we get to the tech element is the human element. Without the parents facilitating the experience for their kids, these digital experiences would be nothing to these kids. Like, unless it's Peppa the Pig or something along those lines, a kid's not going to sit in front of a TV screen and get educational entertainment. So I want to tip my hat to the parents that have been supportive and helping their kids through this. In fact, I think I have to check myself. My kids are no older than 5. I think the youngest kids in this kindergarten are 3. Wow. So these kids, and they're English language learners. So what I've been doing, what I've been asked to do, is create 5-minute videos, 5 days so for each weekday. And basically for the week, I have a theme. And then each day we attack a part of that theme. And we do that 5 different times. So an example, this past week, I created content which was introducing a letter, and then a letter that is a part of a key word, and then a key word that's a part of a sentence. So we've been building towards this over the last 9 weeks. So I try to keep it very simple. And in the beginning, when I was making my videos for my students, because these are not live interactions, these are videos I make for my students, and they have to be 5 minutes because the platform can only handle 5-minute videos. But in the beginning, I was doing everything myself. Like, I was recording myself, and that was it. But if you can imagine Mark Henshaw, the 31-year-old, competing with like Peppa the Pig, the parents started to say, well, our kids, they would like it if there's more video. So I know as teachers, university professors, and college professors, we use videos all the time to introduce topics, concepts, etc. So I've been integrating more videos into my content. Probably copyright issues, but yeah. So basically, it's a combination of my video, also of my voiceover, and I do voiceover PowerPoint slides that I put into my video editor. And also the last thing would be videos of other content that I take. And then, and lastly, like songs, like, introductory songs and different things. But I can't claim that the videos I create, that's 100% my own property, but the rest of it is kind of borrowing from different sources.
Right. And I mean, as teachers, as educators, as long as we follow certain rules, we can borrow that content. There is some level of academic freedom to that. But that's fascinating that you've been moving to this more of this video, making your own video content and trying to keep their attention for a given period of time. I'll challenge you on the idea of we've been using videos for a while in college and in university, because not not really, in my opinion. I feel like we've had the opportunity to use them, but we've said no. We'd rather just stand up and lecture every day. But
Oh, sorry. Was there a question there? You said you would challenge me on that.
just on the idea that we've been using video in colleges and university courses for a while. I think.
Oh, I mean like YouTube videos. I mean like YouTube
yeah.
videos. Like I don't mean like recording videos of the self. I mean using like in different media to do. Like I mean, I was in university starting in 2007. The more hit professors would have like YouTube clips to introduce their classes and stuff.
Yes, the more hip professors were doing that, and the less hip professors were still using overhead transparencies.
Yes, they were. I had a professor that used overhead transparency, but there was a reason for it. It kind of made sense. But also, he would use the thing where he would, it would be like recording what your hands are doing and projecting it onto the wall. I don't know what that's called.
But it's like a shadow video. Casting.
Sorry?
Was it shadow casting?
Well, just picture it looks like an overhead projector, except your hands are on the overhead projector and everything you're doing is being videoed onto the wall.
Oh, yeah. Those are, I want to say the brand name is Elmo. They're like Elmo cameras. But yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So yeah, but the transparencies were still a thing when I was in university in 2007.
No kidding. It's so you've been creating this video content and you've been editing it and taking care of it and getting it posted yourself. Is this something that you've had experience in before, or has this been just a total crash course experience for you as well?
I've had a little bit of experience. When I was a co-op student in high school, I actually did a little bit of filming for the volleyball team that I did a co-op at an elementary school in London, Ontario, at St. Martin Elementary. And I created a video because dare I say, Elias, I use an Apple computer. Forgive me for saying such words.
Yeah, that's fine. But you're allowed to pay more for computer equipment.
Thank you. You're very right. But the video program that they have is very user friendly. It's what I do is very limited, right? So the free video program, I was used to it because I had used it before, and I've been using it ever since. So I haven't done a lot of I don't do any sophisticated video editing. It's more just controlling the sound if necessary, layering a couple sounds over the other. Like I'll do my voice with maybe classical music in the background, a little Rachmaninoff. But that's what I use. But I did have to do a little bit of learning because I had to reteach myself how to use these tools. But as you know, these tools are very user friendly.
Oh, they're night and day compared to what they used to be. Like and the amount of stuff that you can just go out and download that's 100% free, it just blows my mind. The fact that you can get the package that I'm using for my more intense video editing, it's called DaVinci Resolve. It's a Hollywood grade video editing package. You can do anything with it. You can download it and use it commercially for free. It's crazy.
Wow.
But even stuff even programs on the Mac like iMovie, all props to Apple. They were the ones that managed to make video editing easy. Just you want to do a simple video, you can just crack open iMovie and get that sucker done. It's easy. And I love that. That's all we need.
Yeah. So, and I know like iMovie has a Premiere version. Like they have more sophisticated versions that you can pay for that people do use at the Hollywood level. But that's not what I need.
Well, it's not what 99% of the population needs. We just need to get our content out. We just need our learners to get the chance to actually, I don't know, sit down and absorb the content and make sure that we can make, we need to be able to verify that they've learned the content, but we need to make sure that we give them this content in a way that it's actually going to, I don't know, stick in their heads, right?
Yeah. And speaking of like videos and stuff, I want to ask you a question now that you're taking your stuff online. Do you have a feedback system for students so that in terms of like the way you're presenting your information so that they can give you feedback? Oh, you know what? This video, I noticed that you did this thing that was distracting. Like, do you have any kind of feedback process from your students about the way you're doing your online stuff?
I'm still working on that part. What I've been doing personally is there's some students that I'll email just on a personal level and say, hey, what do you find works about the videos? What could be improved? And I've gotten some good feedback that way of literally just asking them, what are your thoughts? What works? What doesn't? Okay. And I'm already starting to take some of that and fix my videos. The biggest barrier I've had to get around is just get the damn content online. Go for good enough. Like it doesn't need to be perfect out of the gate. You can always re-record something later, but as long as you get a video out or content out that gets the concepts across and isn't like, obviously you don't want to have a video that's full of mistakes and outtakes and just, your audio's bad. Like if it's obviously bad, go do a second take or a third take or a 10th take. I've had to do that. But you can always re-record a segment and get another version out. Or the other one that I found, actually, the revelation I've had is with doing this pre-recorded. So what I did for Henshaw was there was about 5 weeks left in the curriculum. So in the span of a weekend, I took all the lesson plans that I prepared already and just ripped through and recorded 5 weeks worth of lectures in a weekend. Mm-hmm. And what stunned me about that process were a couple things. One was how fast I got through the content. Two was how condensed each video was in terms of it was packed full of content, but the videos themselves were short, like between 5 to 7 minutes each. And how once those videos got posted online, when I get questions in now, one thing I absolutely love is if there's a common question, I can say, you know what? All this time that I've got available that I'm not spending doing active lecturing now, and there's lots of reasons why you shouldn't do live stream lectures, but all this time I'm not spending doing live stream lectures or live lectures, I see that 20 people have the same question. I'm going to make a quick 5-minute video and cover that question in detail, because now I can, or with the videos I've created, I can give them a specific link that says, here's the video you should watch, and specifically go to 4 minutes and 30 seconds in, and I talk about this exact point. Watch from 4 minutes 30 to 5 minutes 20, and it will re-explain this point. And that has actually answered more, like a number of questions. I'm thinking in the one Waterloo course, doing that has answered a ton of questions. And then for, again, that lecture time that now that I'm no longer doing live lectures, I pre-record the videos. All that time that I used to spend lecturing, I get one-on-one time with students now. I do one-on-one office hours instead.
Yeah, I think that's great. You found a way to really maximize your time more and increasing your engagement with students, which is probably increasing their ability to understand because of what you've been doing for them. And that's fantastic.
Well, the other part with that as well is I've tightened the feedback loop. So I now, if I'm doing one-on-one office hours, I can now spot the trends of where are people struggling a lot faster than waiting for the big test or the big exam or the assignment that comes in and there's a common problem.
Yeah.
I'm getting way ahead of that.
That's great. That's great.
So
Yeah.
it's a fascinating experience to take this content online. I gotta say, maybe I'm in the minority, maybe I'm the weirdo here, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
I like doing this more than live lectures.
Well, hey, man, I'm really happy to hear that you're having a positive experience. Something that relates to online teaching and stuff, which is an interesting phenomenon in China, and it will affect other universities as well, actually. And before I start, to give some context, there was a window of time where people who were, say, Chinese went back home from Canada or from the UK. So there are university students now who should be in the West, which are back in China. And by extension, there are university students that should be in China, but they're back home in Africa and different places. So that's going to cause a bit of a rift. And I don't know if that's going to affect you or not. But when schools go back into session and people are physically back in school, there is the possibility that not everybody will be able to come back. So I
Well,
wonder
yeah.
if teachers will be expected to run physical classes and online content simultaneously.
Well, my personal opinion on it, and I'm looking at the University of Waterloo very closely because they came out in not mid August, in mid March, and said spring 2020 term is all online. We are doing no physical delivery.
Now, when did spring 2020 start?
In about 3 weeks. It starts at the beginning of May.
Okay.
So
Okay.
May to August 2020 is all online at the University of Waterloo.
Wow. They
Yeah.
made that decision. Wow. Okay.
And they made it
Yeah, I mean,
they made it like April or March. I want to say like March 15th or 17th. Like they were very early on in the game.
what do you think about that? Making such a declarative decision pretty early on, not knowing what we know. Like, what do you think?
I'm glad they did it. I'm really glad they did it because it's, at least for the lecturers, at least for everybody at Waterloo, it gives a level of certainty of like, okay, you know what? Fine. I know the next 4 months, here's what life at the University of Waterloo is going to be like. Fine. I can deal with this. Mm-hmm. It's one less stressor I have to worry about. And you think about the time we had really to take our course online. Like the time I had to take my Waterloo course online was not that long. Basically, March break happened, and then after March break, all classes resumed. So we had we got the order that on March 13th, March break was going to start. That was Friday, March 13th. We were told from March 16th to March 20th, you've got that week to get the rest of your course online. So this was both Henshaw College and University of Waterloo. You had 1 week to get that stuff, you get your course online.
That's not even a week.
And
That's 5 days.
And my spies at private colleges tell me that they got the word on the Friday that they'd be moving online, and they were expected to have stuff ready to go online by Monday the 23rd.
Wow.
So universities and colleges in the public sector at least had a week, whereas the private colleges, some of them had a couple of days to adapt content. So we've not had a lot of warning to do that, at least with saying, you know what, spring 2020 is going to be all online. And now that we're seeing that this COVID-19 might extend for a little while, it's now looking like the best decision that the university, it was a big gamble for sure. I certainly give them credit for having guts to say, you know what, we're going to, regardless of what happens, we're going to go online. But at least it gives professors the time they need to move this content to an online format of some kind.
Mm-hmm. I really like how Waterloo handled that based on what you've told me, because if you think of it from a student perspective as well, they can now plan ahead for the next 4 months.
Yeah.
3 months or whatever it is. So yeah, 3 months. So then if they're going to go home, like some of these students are, again, from different countries. So then they can go back home to their countries, be with their family, do their work. I think that's a really smart move. The unique thing, and I don't know if you're aware of this, but China has disallowed foreigners with valid visas from coming back into China for an unknown period of time. Did you know that?
They've disallowed, as in not
Yeah,
allowed to get in?
anyone who has a valid visa who is not in China right now cannot come back into China for an unforeseen period of time.
Wow.
So that means that my friends who are international teachers who are not here, and keep in mind that a lot of internationals actually are not in China right now because because when the holiday happened, which was kind of before the virus really hit us, they left.
Right.
So if they left right away, they're gone, and they've been gone ever since. And then since the ban happened last week, these people can't come back into China. So that's where Canada's not going to have the same issue right now, because China is the only country, to my understanding, that has banned people with a valid visa. But here in China, like I was saying, the students might come back to some of their schools, but their professors some of them might be online, and some of them might be physically on campus.
Mm-hmm.
So for the high school kids that I used to teach, it's possible that they'll be allowed to come back to school in, I don't know, 3 weeks or so. But then their foreign teachers will be teaching online, and their Chinese teachers will be teaching them in class.
That's going to be...
We'll see how long the ban lasts for. But
yeah, that'll get tricky to manage. But my thoughts, though, about this, about moving to online, I really think, and this is maybe because I'm an outsider in the education world, because like being an instructor, being a lecturer is not my primary gig. But what I've found is, with moving these courses online, with moving this content online, I find that for content that doesn't change that frequently, or for skills that you need to acquire, I just find this traditional lecturing method to be a real waste of time. That I'd rather spend that time doing the one-on-one with my students. The live stream lectures, I find I've yet to find a student that says, you know what, I love these live stream lectures. They're awesome, because they're almost always garbage. The biggest problem, somebody pointed this out to me on Twitter, with one of the biggest problems with live stream lectures is, you think about all the everything that's competing for your attention, and now everybody's stuck at home. If you miss something in a live stream lecture, you might as well shut that lecture off and go watch Netflix, because you're done.
Yeah.
It's, unless they've got some sort of rewind faculty, but then again, you might as well just watch a replay of it. With the videos I've been doing, keeping them short and tight, condensed, it's getting the material they need to know across in an efficient way, getting that done perfectly or good enough the first time. Because what's the worst thing in the world when we're in the classroom is when we make a mistake, right?
Mm-hmm. The best and the worst thing.
Yeah, it's the best and the worst thing. But it's like at worst, you're losing a fair amount of time. They get confused, and you have to walk some stuff back. It does waste time. With getting the lectures right the first time on video, at least that's now up, and now I can spend that time doing the one. I don't know. The amount of one-on-one time I've now got with students is just, I could not ask for a bigger blessing in this. Like, I love that one-on-one time. I freaking love it.
Maybe I'm really happy that you've managed to make this work for your students. It's great.
But I think with this crisis, we're now going to get tuned into a new way that we can deliver education, especially a way that meets the needs of a larger audience, and gives us the chance to have the one thing that educators never have enough time for, which is that one-on-one time with students. Like, which lecturer has ever said, or which, I mean, you're a teacher. When have you ever said, man, I wish I had less, I'm so glad I have no one-on-one time with my students. I wish I could have even less time to interact with my students as people and make sure that they're as successful as they can be.
Yeah.
Like, we never get enough of that, do we?
No. So I'm really happy that's working out for you.
So I don't know. I hope that, and with the course that I've made, and I call it course, I'm going to call it course a little bit loosely because, like, I've condensed the content. I've used kind of the principles. I've tried to practice what I preach. My fiance kind of nudged me and said, "You can stop tweaking your lighting setup now and start recording." Because, like, I was setting, I was trying to set up some lights and a little bit of filtering and get some good shots, and it was like, oh, hold on a second. I'm tweaking and fiddling. I need to get this content out because, hey, lecturers are going to need this stuff. So it's, it's been an interesting journey to get this content online and then free myself up for those online office hours. I don't know. I feel like there's a better way that we're about to take advantage of. And if it weren't for this crisis, I don't know. I think we would have gotten there eventually. I just think it would have been a lot longer in the making.
Fair. Yeah. I like the way you're looking at that. And I can say that in terms of a positive that has come out of this as well, the school I used to work for had no centralized online platform for teachers to use, store, interact with students or any of that. But as soon as this crisis happened and it looked like it wasn't going to go away anytime soon, they bought a platform and they've been using it. So, like, it's good to see that because I was actually a part of a study of the Halton District's Catholic School Board, Stratford, Ontario area, many years ago. And we were looking at the uses of tablets in the classroom. And to summarize the outcomes of the study, and we studied a lot of kids, like a lot of classes, like hundreds of kids, qualitative, quantitative. What we found was it was the kids that had the learning challenges that benefited the most from the technological stuff because of the differentiation and different things we can do. And because it's a lot of work for a teacher to set up a process to enable many kids to do a lot of different things, but then market in such a way that's consistent across the board. Whereas the software tools that we have now, it's so much easier to enable students to work more freely in the way that they choose to have more options, which is, I think, a better indicator of assessment and their abilities. But then teachers can still, again, do their marking pretty efficiently, but effectively. So I think there's a lot there that we can learn. And when I went to that conference with you, I talked to a guy from Microsoft, and Microsoft has been making some remarkable innovations and changes and upgrades to their software. Like their Microsoft education stuff is fantastic from what I saw.
Yeah, I got to get back and see what the Microsoft guys have been doing on the education side because it's they've got some good stuff. I got to say, I got a feeling that the company behind Desire to Learn, in fact, they may still be called Desire to Learn. I can't remember right now. I feel like they're about to have a really good year. I wonder if their stock is public.
Well, anyone who's in online education. Yeah, they're definitely anyone who's doing anything online, where they can actually make money online. Like we were joking about Disney Plus, for example, Netflix sales, Amazon Prime, here in China, deliveries there are more deliveries. Stuff like that. It's not all bad, Eli. It's not all bad.
In other words, those of us who are figuring out a way to adapt, we're going to be all right.
Yes, if we're going to get all Darwinian on this, yes.
I guess, but I'm the one thing I am really nervous about though is, and this is maybe we can end off with this thought. I don't want to end off on a dark thought, but I want to see where this goes. I've had a bit of a thought experiment about this. Have you heard about the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, CERB?
Is that what Justin Trudeau has been announcing over the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, it's one of the many programs. So the gist of this program is if you're out of work or you're still working, but your income is basically cut off because your employer can't pay you, basically you're making nothing at all, you can apply to get up to $2,000 a month for 4 months to cover the wages that you would lose. And then in the United States, I know I haven't followed this for a little while, but I know there was talk of basically cutting same sort of emergency checks to Americans. They added some means testing, which is a bad idea, but I'll get into that a little later. But what I've been thinking about with this coronavirus and what makes me really nervous about it is not the virus itself, because it's like this is going to have an end date. What makes me really nervous is we're getting to a point where we're able to automate more and more of our society. For example, we're able to, like when I look at autonomous vehicles, the autonomous vehicles are ready. The laws and ethics around autonomous vehicles aren't. There are, when you look at assembly lines and factories and food manufacturing, we can automate a lot of that stuff. What happens? I feel like in some ways, Corona is a test case for when we have increased automation that permanently leaves a certain amount of the workforce unemployable. Not just unemployed, but your job now ceases to exist. And you either get retrained or you're going to have to sit at home. And we don't have a good answer for those people. And so what do we do?
Yeah.
What are we going to do? What we're seeing with our system right now is we're getting emergency funds scrambled to get people to pay, to frickin' pay rent for starters. But even that, we're looking at, we're spending 2 to 3% of our GDP on this emergency relief fund to cover people for 4 months? Like, how sustainable is that? How can we, what are we going to do when we have that amount of the population that just cannot, that is unemployable? What are we going to do?
Yeah, it's interesting because we've seen different versions of what's happening now in the past. Case in point, the Industrial Revolution, where certain jobs became obsolete and more automation at the time was happening. But I mean, I think it's a little different because like before you had a guilds person and then you had a factory that made many tables rather than a woodworker making, one table at a time. Whereas now, to some respect, we've eliminated the need for laborers. Like, I mean, if I think of my father, for example, he works in the wine industry, Altero Wines. It's one of the biggest wine companies in Canada. And he's walked me through how much wine can go from the liquid into a bottle that's wrapped and ready to ship. And it is nuts how fast these machines work. That means that you don't have an assembly line anymore. So what the Industrial Revolution found, which was like the Taylorism, the scientific method, which was just basically putting everything into small things and each person did a small thing until the thing was done. Machines are doing all that now. So I think there is a difference between, what we saw then and what we see now. Because, for example, even like McDonald's, they introduced the kiosks where you walk up to them and you do your order. And in some places in China, nobody will serve you. Like, nobody will actually take your order. You have to do it on the machine. So then that eliminates the person's need to be a cashier. So now that job is gone. So you can argue that people will need to be more computer literate in order to keep up with the demand of the jobs, but there's also a generation gap. Like there will be people who will likely never learn those skills.
I've taught those people.
Because of yeah. So then what do we do with those people? So I think that's one of the strongest arguments I've heard for like basic income or living income. I don't follow that literature. I don't really know, what's being said there, but I think that's one thing I've heard is like once these jobs disappear, what are we going to do with these people that just don't have these skills?
I know that people have called me out on Twitter every now and then for being an advocate of universal basic income, and I'm not going to hide that fact. I personally think that I feel like I'm thinking about this in a different way, that instead of thinking about universal basic income as, oh, this would be a nice to have, I'm looking at it as we're going to have that because we've tried to go down the route of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Some people can't. There are some people who, that just for one reason or another cannot participate in the system that we've created. But then you've also got people that are just rendered completely unemployable by the current system that we have. And I've taught I've had introductory programming courses where I've had former assembly line workers and people that have just been laid off or put out of a job or their job no longer exists. And they're trying to bridge the gap between now and 10 years from now when they can maybe get whatever little is left of their pension or just get CPP and OAS, Canada Pension Plan and Old Age Security. And, they're staring down the barrel of this kind of being like their last best option. And I'm going like computer programming, like you're competing with, you want to talk competition, a competitive industry, like there is no shortage of okay programmers and there's not that much of a shortage of good programmers either. And it can be very much a young person's game. There are lots of young, hungry programmers out there that will code circles around somebody who is in their mid-50s and doing a career change. That's not to say it's impossible to do that career change, but to just I have issues with colleges that say, come in off the street and we can teach you to be a programmer. I think that's selling a bogus bill of goods, personally.
Well, you're the one that's teaching these people, so you would know.
Well, and like not to be harsh on that, but I personally believe that. I think you can't say to people, we can turn anyone into a computer programmer. No, some people do not have the mind for it. Like I fully know that I'm the weirdo because I'm the one that gets computers. Like there is a certain way that you have to think in order to be able to write code, in order to be able to use like the computers as easy as they've gotten to use are still complex beasts and it boggles my mind that the damn things work at all. Like I think it's very disingenuous to just turn to anybody on the street and say, you know what, walk in and we'll turn you into a computer programmer in 3 years. No, that's not how it works.
One of the positive things and also negative things at the same time about Canada's education system, and actually Malcolm Gladwell was recently talking about this, is that Canada set itself up to their MO is mostly accessibility, right? Which means quantity over quality. We're more concerned with graduation rates than we are with graduates and what they graduate with. I've seen this time and time again with different governments that have come through Ontario. And if you look at I know it's a bit of an extreme example, but Ivy League schools are not growing. For the most part, they cap off their enrollment. Whereas in Canada, it's a different funding model too, right? But in Canada, we just want more, more, and more. I mean, look what's happening in Ontario right now with the strikes, with the school strikes. There's arguments again. We're hearing, class sizes don't matter. But regardless, I think part of the problem with your situation is that the universities are saying anyone should go to university but that's not true. Some people will have a much better life if they go to college, and they'll make more money. I mean, like I've been to university, you've been to university. University costs a lot of money. But I have cousins and friends who went to college, and they didn't have that huge debt when they were done college because they had an apprenticeship, and the cost of college is generally lower, and they started doing things right after college. So so one of the downsides of the quantity model of the access to education model in Canada, and it's similar with our healthcare system. You can only serve so many people in such a quality way, and then unfortunately after that, there's a bit of just people who will be left behind.
And then there's the dirty little secret of the graduate side of things. Like this is, a university professor who shall remain unnamed confided this in me once. This was when I was potentially going to do a master's in computer science. I eventually left that. But they confided in me that because I was doing really well in a particular course, and this professor pulled me aside and he said, at the end of the day, you're going to get the exact same degree as everybody else will in this class. And that degree is not going to reflect, the amount of work that you've put into this course. It's just going to say that you've achieved a certain baseline. You've achieved that. You've maintained that 60% standard. And he said to me, do you think that, and this is going to sound awfully egotistical, but here we go. He said, do you think that your work is better than theirs based on, and because I just did an incredibly good presentation, and I said, well, yeah, I think my work was better. And he said, well, how is anybody going to know based on your degree? I said, well, I guess I'd have to demonstrate it to them somehow. But the other part that he confided in me was he said, all these other people, why do you think I'm keeping them in this class and they're getting the marks in the 70s? And why do you think the class average is in the 80s? And I said, well, because everybody's doing well and we're at a master's level and you would expect that. And he said, no, it's not that at all. A lot of these people who are in this class, they're working on a thesis or they're working on project work. They have funding attached to them. To actually fail a graduate student, you have to have a really damn good reason. It is a much more political decision to fail a master's student than a lot of universities would like to let on, because that's not just failing a student, that's potentially somebody's grant or research money going out the door too. And I don't know, when I heard that, when I had that explained to me, it was like, and just with my experience in teaching in these higher ed institutions, there has been the odd moment where I realized there's something not quite right with the way we're doing things.
Yeah. Well, as someone who did a master's thesis, I would agree with exactly what that guy was saying or person was saying. And yeah, because you don't magically go from the 70s to the 80s. That's just not, oh no, we've all earned it. We all did an undergrad and now we're doing a master's, therefore, it's not the way it works. Like you said, funding, if you are getting under an 80, in my experience, in my master's that I did, if you're getting under an 80, it means you're not really at the level you should be. That's just the 80 in a master's is the 70 in an undergrad.
Well, it's the thing I found with doing my master's is that if you're not getting 80s in a master's degree, it is your fault. You are 100%. You're doing something wrong. Just straight up. If you are not getting an 80, that's on you. If you show up and do the work, and you in a master's course, you're gonna get the mark.
Yeah, because like you said, it is because. Think about it. If a student gets funded, what really happens is the professor gets funded.
Yes.
So if the professor gets funded, the professor's happy, they spend less of their money or they make whatever. And so Yeah. Anyway.
And so now that we've revealed this to the whole world, I'm gonna watch as I get blackballed from certain university and college institutions. But that's okay. I'm willing to put that on the line. But and I have to temper that with the fact that despite how messed up some parts of the system are, you and we both have an objective as educators, which is, I don't care if somebody comes through the door and they don't know, and they're in a computer programming course and they've never touched a computer in their life. I want them to walk away with something valuable regardless. I want to make the best of that situation. Now, whether that is to gently nudge them and say, maybe this program's not for you, consider this. If that's something that you have to say, I think that's a conversation worth having. But my goal is, if you walk into my classroom, I want you to walk out the other end with something, with having gained some sort of knowledge that you can apply to your life somehow. Yeah.
Yep. Yeah. And I see that even as an English teacher, I see the exact same thing. Like through, I say through English, I learned, because my undergrad is in English and history. Through English, I learned how to think and communicate. And that's exactly what I try to instruct to my students. So by the time they're done my course, I hope that they're better at thinking and clearly thinking first and then clarifying their thoughts to clearly communicate it. And I think that working in industry, which we both have experience doing, especially you with your own business, it's really helped me to be a lot more of a pragmatic teacher. I can teach English literature in a pragmatic way. So then when people leave the classroom, they can see why it matters, why it's valuable to them. On that note, I do have to wrap up. So how do you want to end this, Elias?
Well, you know what? I was just about to suggest, I think we found a really good positive note to end on, in that, despite how messed up systems may be, what the best thing we can do is make the best of what we've got, and to help our learners, help the world out as best we can, given our constraints. I think, as scary as the times might be that we're in right now, we're also in for, I think we're about to hit a really exciting renaissance of some sort. And with people like you in this world, Mark, I've got a lot of hope.
Well, Elias, and people like yourself as well, you're a very genuine person, and you're very caring, and I want to say you're also very mindful, which is something that I really appreciate about you. You're in the room, you're in the moment when you're with somebody, and I think that's something that really leaves an impression on other people.
I certainly hope so. Thank you, Mark. And thank you for coming on the show. Let's roll the outro. By the way, do you have a blog or anything that you want to promote?
Nothing I want to promote right now. I'm living a life a little more of a low-key way. But thank you so much for asking.
No problem. Well, Mark, it has been awesome to have you on the show. We're going to do this again sometime soon. I know it, because you are super interesting. One of the most interesting people I know.
Well, regardless, it would be great just to chat with you. So thank you, Elias, for your time.
Thank you, Mark. You stay healthy. You stay safe. And we'll talk to you again, dear listener, on Let's Solve the Universe. Love y'all.
Bye-bye.